Hey folks, Larry here again with Curio Mechanics. Just kind of a quick little video today. We're going to talk about things I've kind of learned over the years working on vintage computers and probably a little bit in computers in general. With the rise in popularity of retro gaming, people are starting to refurbish and collect more computers that are from the earlier era of the home computer. And I did go through those times the first time around, so I have a little bit of experience with it, but I've been kind of messing with it some more again and trying to get some models fixed up and letting them go on eBay. I am paring down my collection pretty significantly. So I've been doing a lot of work under the hood lately, so I just thought I'd share some thoughts. First thing I want to touch on is pricing. It seems that the collector's market has reduced the number of available units. What used to be considered pretty much almost trash is now becoming more and more valuable. So I just want to kind of throw that out there, that if you're thinking about it, I won't say it's a money pit, but depending on what kind of a system you're into and how popular those parts are, you may wish to do some research before you lock yourself into a specific architecture or vintage. And I guess that kind of leads to the next thing, is maybe it's a good idea to think ahead of time about what kind of your end result should be, what you'd like to play or do with said machine or machines. If you're just kind of a completionist and want one of everything, I think you're going to find there's some that are pretty nasty surprises. Some examples of that would be an 8-bit ISA video card. If you don't know what that means, the earliest ISA slots on the motherboard, the expansion slots, only took a shorter connector and had less throughput. And several cards, VGA being one of them, were not really popular as expansion cards until we went to 16-bit ISA, which offered 2 slots. What that means for you is it's going to be kind of hit and miss on what you can find that actually works properly in that situation. And I've been buying some parts, and that's one of the things I found was rather expensive. There's quite a bit of misinformation about what works and what doesn't, and a lot of conflicting information. So unless you're willing to just keep trying stuff to see what works, then maybe, like I say, kind of really shoot for a specific target. Don't just shotgun it and buy a whole bunch of parts and hope you can get it all to fit. You do need to do quite a bit of research. And I guess one other thing I'd mention is older computers, especially pre-Windows. Plug and play, one of the things it allowed us to do was manage the resources, or have Windows rather, manage the resources that are available to all the peripherals. The most important of those being an IRQ, which is short for interrupt request, and an IO address, or the space in memory where things are actually put and used. Interrupt requests, you pretty much can't share them. There are some exceptions to that, and it's fairly rare. So just know that when you run out of numbers, you're out. There is a finite limit to how much you can put in the same box, regardless of how many holes you have. And most of the expansion cards, although they offer jumpers usually or software to set those values, you're going to find there's only so many choices. And a lot of software was designed with just the defaults in mind. Sound Blaster is a great example. The sound cards all had to emulate their interrupt and IO space just to even be seen or be compatible. If it didn't see something at IRQ5, in some cases it would just decide that you didn't have a sound card, or IO address 220, which is the default for the digital sound capabilities. So again, things that were the standard are the most predictable, but of course they're going to be the most expensive or most sought after because it is simpler. Doesn't mean you can't venture out of that territory. There are several other brands and types of all of them that work quite well, but you just have to go in that ahead of time and accept that occasionally you're going to run across probably a game or something that just kind of refuses to play ball with the rest of the system. And I/O addresses are the same situation. Parallel serial ports, everything in the computer requires a space to talk to the CPU, and the CPU needs to know where that space is. So you can't just willy-nilly pick some and expect everything to just understand that you've moved it. Now, there are some newer projects that offer some pretty interesting capabilities. PicoMem comes to mind. It's an 8-bit ISA board that uses a Raspberry Pi Pico to emulate all sorts of functions. So you can put a virtual hard disk in a machine that never had one. You can have a virtual sound card in a machine that would have never had one. So there are ways that you can work around some of these limitations. But I'm stressing that especially even Windows 95 was pretty iffy with it. 98, they were starting to get a handle on it, but you still can only do so much. By XP, IRQ steering and some of the more advanced functionality became more robust, and so the later you go in the operating system stack, the little bit more room you have for, I don't want to call it misconfiguration, but that's kind of what you're doing. You're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. And so I just wanted to be very upfront about that the older you go with a computer, the more specific each function is designed to operate and expected to operate. So to that end, most computers these days, the bulk of the heavy lifting is done by the motherboard itself. Your network connection, sound card, video card, USB ports are all driven by the motherboard itself. Well, back in the day, it was all a separate expansion card. Even your floppy drive, in some cases, requires a separate card to do nothing but decode the drive signals and transfer those into the motherboard and into the CPU so the rest of the system can use it. So it's best to, like I say, think of ahead of time of a scenario, or at least be aware that you're going to have to choose options that give you the greatest amount of flexibility, or if you're shooting for a specific target, know what those requirements are and build accordingly. So some games, some software really had a wide variety of options that you could choose, and some had virtually none. So it really stinks if you go through all that effort and find out that the one game you were hoping to play, or the one software you wanted to run, isn't going to do anything. So the other thing I'd say is that if you're going to be working with a lot of peripheral cards, or say shopping on eBay, or going from sources that aren't 100% reliable, which nothing that age is, so but anyway, you want to have a real good testing setup, a very reliable base system that you can possibly plug something into, see if it works, use that to rule out issues that you may have, to find out, is it broken, is it set up wrong, am I just putting the wrong thing in there? It's the concept and repair of known good. If you are having trouble, one of the fastest ways to find out where the problem is to switch it with one that you know absolutely works, or put it in a system that you know absolutely works and see what happens. Put it in, the system doesn't boot, take it out, the system boots, well, then you know for sure. Or put one in that you know does work, and then all of a sudden everything's fine, well, then you know it's the component. So the more interchangeability you have, the better off you'll be able to pin down some of these odd problems that may crop up. But in order to do that, you have to have a base to work from. If you're just buying a whole bunch of stuff and put it together and it's not working, you'd have a lot of variables in that experiment. And so that's something you want to avoid, or at least, like I say, be aware that you're going to have to fight with it a little bit more and possibly spend some more money to get known good to use to troubleshoot. And I would absolutely stress the troubleshooting process is part of the restoration and building or using of these vintage machines. A lot of the components in it are getting rather up there and way beyond their design expectations for life expectancy. So don't blame the thing if it only goes 35 years. It was only designed to run for 10. And so I don't want to scare you and say that any day it could explode, but problems can come out of nowhere that you hopefully will want to be able to address so that you're not throwing the rest of it away. And probably what could be a simple replacement, or say a cable going funny or something, relatively basic, causing your whole system to fail or making it less than pleasant to use. And that's part of it. Fan noise is a perfect example. A lot of these older machines had fans that just were incredibly noisy. The earlier power supplies were in their fans at mains voltage, 120 volts. So it didn't take a lot of dust to make those things just sound like vacuum cleaners. And you probably don't want to be in the same room with that. So a little TLC can go a long way, and they do require TLC. It's true of any computer. You don't want to run it forever without it occasionally opening the case and blowing the dust out. And sometimes those problems can be caused by basic, I don't want to say neglect, but lack of understanding of what it's doing. Some processors run hotter than others, and there's a lot of examples, but I just wanted to touch on that fact again, that the more you're able to look at the big picture, the better it'll help you zero in on things quicker and hopefully have a better chance of successfully overcoming them, because it can be frustrating. I personally enjoy the challenge, and I'm not daunted. And over quite a long history of working on computers, I've learned don't give up, because it's when you give up the whole thing's done. But if you keep plugging away and using some logic, say, well, I tried this, I tried that, so let's move in this direction. Eventually, like Sherlock Holmes would say, when you've ruled everything out, the remaining choices, regardless of how unlikely they are, must be the truth. So you can pin it down, but you just got to go one at a time. Try this, try that. And one of the most basic troubleshooting steps I'll give you is just to reduce it to its absolute bare minimum. Motherboard, CPU, RAM, that's it. And if that doesn't work, take out the RAM and see if you get a valid postcode that matches that. So the fewer variables in your experiment, the more likely you are to be able to pin down a series of things that may point you to the failure. And with computers, it can be a little bit harder because intermittent faults exist. Sometimes it's heat or the power level. I mean, you could be maybe not getting your full voltage out of the wall, or your power supply could be kind of on the edge. And so there's good days and bad days, and you won't have done anything different, and it'll work differently. So finding the fault, it has to be failing for you to be able to pin it down. I could just be having a good day and you think everything's great, and then 2 days later your problem comes back and you thought you changed all this and that. But it requires persistence and patience. And like I said, just expect that troubleshooting periodically, especially when you're setting it up. Once you get it running, it should be a whole lot more reliable. And think about that when you're building it. Think about parts that have stood the test of time and why everybody wants this specific model. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe the other models weren't as good, or maybe there's some hidden configuration gotchas. And so in the early days of computers, again, I'll go back to the Sound Blaster sound cards. Sound Blaster wasn't the best one out there. In fact, the performance on them was pretty iffy on a lot of the models, but everybody bought one because everybody thought you had one, so all the software was written to support it. So everybody bought one because it was what they could be the most likely chance of working. So it was just a self-fulfilling cycle. That was what they had, so that was what they wrote the software for. Well, then that caused more people to buy that one. But the product itself was never amazing. It just became the most popular. And as far as manufacturers, there are good and bad. There are definitely models I won't go anywhere near, and some that I've found to be absolutely bulletproof and stood the test of time, and I think will last a long time into the future and are worth restoring and working on. So I won't taint you with my personal views, but I will say that it's in your long-term best interests to try to work with reputable parts. Sure, you can take a chance, but the power supplies are a great example. I'll just name one name here. Sparkle Power is a power supply manufacturer that's kind of known to go poof. And so it has sparkle, right, built in, and it's in the name. But if a power supply goes poof, it can take out your motherboard, can take out your processor, can take out anything that's connected to that power, which just happens to be the entire computer. So you save $20 because you bought this great used tested supply, and then all of a sudden you find out, well, it just took out a $200 computer, and that's a bad thing. So sometimes it's worth it to get the extra notch of quality right up front, and then you know that won't be a concern for you in the future, or shouldn't be. Things still happen. Any power supply, if you get a big enough surge, or you're, letting the... I know one particular person admitted that when they were a kid, they used to throw a towel over the computer because it made too much noise in the middle of the night. So then, well, that would cause the computer to run hotter. And so what they thought as a kid was just a great idea because it made it quieter actually wound up risking the whole computer going kaplooey. So things do happen. And that's just, again, expect that as part of the journey. But embrace it, enjoy it, learn from it. And maybe next time, either do differently or better, or just know that it's coming and prepare for it. So I guess that's kind of the thing I want to stress here, is that if you're into retro vintage hardware or trying to consider getting into it, it is fun. It is satisfying when you get something completely up and running and you can sit back and enjoy it. But don't expect it to be foolproof once you get there. And don't go into it with false expectation that if it fits in the hole, it works. That is true nowadays to a great extent. I always tell people, I'm afraid to build my own computer. Try it. Everything only fits in one hole. And it's pretty goof-proof. But those lessons were learned by the manufacturers kind of the hard way, because believe you me, if there's a way to put it in backwards, we human beings will find it. And, the old joke, the law of USB, there's two ways to plug it in, and we'll still have to try 3 times before we find the right way. That's absolutely true. And earlier computers aren't going to necessarily shield you from that learning curve. There are lots of examples of common mistakes that were rather spectacular, but we'll just leave it at this, that if it's a hobby, enjoy your hobby, but part of that hobby will be the maintenance, upkeep, configuration, and occasional surprises. But that's all part of the fun. So I hope that helped. I hope it shed a little bit of perspective on it for you. I'm not, like I say, trying to scare you by any means. I think this is very easily researched nowadays with the dawn of the internet. It makes so many of these things so much easier. There's manuals, the jumpers, the settings, common experience, the hive mind, so many different resources that just weren't there when this computer was first being put into people's hands. It's not shooting fish in a barrel, but it's surprising to me how much easier it is these days. But even I still struggle. And like I say, I got quite a bit of experience. And, well, once in a while, you just run into something that makes you scratch your head. And you just got to roll with it. And like I say, try to learn from it, but don't get angry. If you get angry, you'll do bad things and you just will not have a good result and not a good time. And that's not what it's about. A hobby is supposed to be enjoyable. Granted, there are always downsides to things, but like I say, don't be afraid of it. And give it a try. It can be quite enjoyable. It's a fun family project. I know a lot of people say, well, I don't know anything about computers. Well, that's how you learn. If you understand what makes them go or you put one together, you'll have a real good understanding. And whether you will ever do it again may be a different question, but you can always sit back and say, yeah, okay, I get it. I know what a hard drive is. I know where the CPU goes. I know why you can't put an AMD in an Intel motherboard and, stuff like that. So I feel that the benefit outweighs the frustration. And as far as cost, well, it just depends on what you're getting into and what your threshold is. If you're on a real tight budget, you're going to learn to do more weeding out of the bad parts because you're probably going to get more at that price point. But then you will come out of it a more experienced and better tech. So maybe the next time you do run into something that's acting flaky, you'll say right away, yep, that's not supposed to happen. And so, it feeds on itself. The more you do it, the better you get at it. But I'm kind of rambling. Like I said, this is just an essay type thought, and I have been working on one machine now for 3 weeks. I was hoping to have the video out for it already, and this is kind of filler for that. But it reminded me of some of the things that you just need to take a step back and accept, but persevere and adapt and overcome. I think that's the human species' real strength, and it definitely applies to computers of any generation, but especially vintage computers, just because they hadn't worked out all the creature features yet. So as far as tools, a good screwdriver is about it, but tweezers, a good light, magnifying glass, forceps, all definitely play into it. And common gotchas, don't overlook the basics. They say that 80% of the new techs go right past the problem because they're looking for that one weird thing they read about on the forum, and hey, the stupid power is unplugged. So just make sure you look at everything, and cables do go bad. It sounds crazy if it hasn't moved in 30 years. Well, just shipping or time or magic. I don't know what does it, but I've had plenty of times when I go, well, it ain't this, it ain't that. It's got to be what's in between. And lo and behold, that fixes it or makes it different. And so you say, and that brings up another point, multiple failures. I've been fighting with the disk drives, this machine. That's what's been holding me back. And I think it's literally the controller card, the cable, and the drive. Well, all you know is that when you hit floppy, you abort, retry, fail, and well, okay, and let's get different disks. Well, that didn't do it. Let's get a different drive. Well, that made it different, and those can really get you twisted up, but just steady as she goes, and like I say, use known good. So that's about all I'm going to say on the subject. I've rambled long enough, but I just wanted to throw this out there and hope it helps somebody. But most of all, enjoy your day.